Hello and welcome to Pluribus Unum's Fireside Chats. Not as good as FDR's, but hey, it's something. This was one of those weeks where I thought that I was gonna be struggling to find stuff to talk about. But then, the later end of the week literally was just like, surprise! Here's a ton of stuff to talk about. Man, the year sure is ending with a bang. And as the year is ending, we're of course getting to the point where we're about to enter into that section where the yearly tradition continues. I don't want to give too much away, considering I want it to be a little bit of a surprise, but I will say this. That video will be, up to this point, the most expensive video that I have made. With that out of the way, let's get right into the news. First, some foreign news, but not the one that you think. That one's not yet. First, we're going to be talking a bit about Argentina. In Argentina, Cristina Fernandez Kirchner was sentenced to 6 years in a $1 billion fraud case. For those who don't know the entirety of the political situation in Argentina, Cristina Fernandez Kirchner, or CFK, is the popular vice president in a particular faction of the, she's a part of a faction in the nationwide Peronist movement, espousing an ideology called Kirchnerism, which was founded by her husband, Nestor Kirchner. There's so much stuff to go into about Peronism, Kirchnerism, but all you need to know is Peronism is basically the ideology surrounding Juan and Eva Perón, and it's so malleable that there are people on the right and the left who consider themselves Peronist. Nestor and Cristina led a faction that was basically the left-wing version of it. Nestor won the presidency of Argentina, then Cristina ran in his place in the next cycle, and the supposed theory was that Nestor would run in the next cycle, and then she would run in the cycle after him, but unfortunately, Nestor passed away, and Cristina just ran for 2 terms. After those 2 terms, she retired, and then someone ran in her stead, and lost by a landslide. However, Cristina then got to work and started reinvigorating her movement, and she became part of a ticket with a man by the name of Alberto Fernandez, who is now currently the president of Argentina. And while the Kirchners and Fernandez, they're pretty good politicians, at least comparatively, there was one big problem with Alberto Fernandez. He's good, but his country doesn't really see that. And he has a massive disapproval rating. So much so that if he ran, many people were wondering if he would even make it to the general election. You see, because Argentina has this interesting system called PASO, where basically everybody runs. If you if you have a political party and there are 2 factions within your political party, both of you would present a candidate list, and then both of you would run. And this goes for literally every party. If, not only is everybody of every party invited, but even people in different factions of the parties are invited, and then everybody runs at once. And here's what happens. First, everybody who gets under a certain percentage point, it's 1.15, they're automatically eliminated. Then, the person who is the winner of the internal primary of the party, if you had a political party and there were 3 candidates and one person won, then that person gets to be your candidate's nominee in the general election, and things basically just continue as normal from there. Alberto Fernandez, since he's so unpopular, many people were saying that he just didn't have a shot at winning. So much so that they were floating the idea of possibly having CFK run for another term. And now she's being arrested. Now here's the thing. She technically cannot be arrested. Basically, she is sentenced, but she can't legally go to jail because in Argentina, the law says that an incumbent politician cannot go to jail. What happens instead is that politician is then forbidden from running in any elections for the rest of their life. And, shock of all shocks, many people piece together that this case was brought up at this time when she was possibly going to win in the election. Because, here's the thing, of all of the people who were running in the left-wing faction in Argentina, Cristina was the only one who was winning. So Argentina is basically lost at this point. If you remember, this isn't the first time someone tried to get rid of her in order to stop this. She recently nearly had an assassination attempt, be successful against her. So she was very much a target for a while. Now let's move on to the next story. Another Latin American story, but this one has a little bit of a worse side on all angles. The situation that just happened in Peru. Now, here's the thing about Peru. Many people have not been paying attention to Peru at all. And then one big thing really happened, and all of a sudden everybody's paying attention to Peru, and everybody seems to have a hot take here. But as somebody who has been paying attention to the Peruvian political situation for a while, I think I have the objectively correct take on all this. Okay, so basically, here's what happened. So, if you've been paying attention, you'll know that Pedro Castillo and his Congress have had an interesting back and forth. In fact, Pedro Castillo's just had a very interesting political career for the history of his entire political career. So, Pedro Castillo is a guy who ran as this Marxist school teacher union-based candidate. He was basically some fringe left-wing candidate that nobody expected to get any sort of notoriety. But then lo and behold, one day he managed to become the person in the runoff against Fujimori, the daughter of a dictator of Peru named Alberto Fujimori. That's very important. We'll get back to that. When he did so, he took this massive rightward shift in the general election. Basically, even though he was campaigning as a Marxist originally, now he was running around saying that he was not a communist. When he was just this random fringe left candidate that nobody cared about, he could campaign however he wanted. But now that he is the candidate against Fujimori, he now has to actually legitimately think of a campaign strategy. And unfortunately, his campaign strategy was essentially run to the right wing on a lot of issues, but also spend a majority of your time saying what you're not. Every time he'd be posed a question, it would basically be him answering what he isn't. Because, let's be fair, the Peruvian press, they're not really that much of friends of the left wing, because the Peruvian left has basically been destroyed thanks to a militant group by the name of the Shining Path. So basically what would happen is, they'd go, oh, so you're basically like a Veronica Mendoza, the mainstream left-wing candidate. And he's like, no, I'm not like her. I'm a little bit more radical than her. Oh, so you're like Alberto Guzman, the leader of Shining Path. Oh, no, I am not like him. I can guarantee that I am not like him. Oh, so you're gonna be like a leftward turncoat like Ollanta Humala? No, you're not gonna, you don't understand. I'm not him either. Oh, so what are you, like Chavez? It's like, no, you don't understand. I am not Chavez either. It's like, you see, he spent a lot of time saying what he wasn't, not a lot of time on what he actually was, because what he was became muddied by everybody else. Things got even worse when he actually managed to win, and he got a extremely right-wing Congress, so that thing had to become more muddied. You see, he came in with, like, good ideas and tried to stay within his left base. You know, he appointed a person who was, like, a pretty far-left member of Congress, but then pretty soon, he replaced that guy because that guy was considered too left-wing for, you know, the Peruvian Congress. So he appointed someone who was like a moderate leftist. Then that didn't work, so he appointed another candidate, a person who was basically an anti-woke leftist. You know, sort of like a red brown. But again, it was like not that far from Pedro Castillo, because Pedro Castillo's sort of campaign is like that. Then when that didn't work, he appointed someone who literally praised Adolf Hitler. Huh. Quite an interesting development. And Pedro Castillo just, like, that cabinet reshuffle showed that he was just generally shifting towards the right, to the point where literally him and Bolsonaro were now all buddy-buddy with each other. Like, he went in to office literally being like, I love Maduro, and left office going like, I love Bolsonaro. And I saw this writing on the walls when he won the nomination. I said that. I said stuff like this, like, I didn't trust him, I didn't think he was going to be doing a lot of good, but I was expecting something like a Lenin Moreno, or like a freaking, Ollanta Humala. You know, like, I was expecting someone that was just going to be like a turncoat, but that didn't quite work. And even though he kept trying to pander to the right wing of his Congress, the right-wing Congress didn't really give a shit. So they just kept arguing with each other, essentially. Like, they impeached Castillo, it didn't work. They tried to impeach him again, it didn't work. And by the second impeachment, everybody was just basically getting tired of all of the shenanigans within the government. Peru Libre and a lot of other people were basically just telling for Castillo to resign from the presidency and call for new elections, because it was just like, it was clearly not working. Pedro Castillo responded by leaving his own party, the party that gave him his notoriety, Peru Libre, and even got a bunch of the members of Peru Libre to basically join with him and form like some like sycophantic like mini cult, like basically just being yes men to him. I think Castillo, if I remember correctly, Castillo at one point did try to dissolve Congress, but they voted against it. All the while, they were gearing up for another impeachment against Castillo. And it was ironically, they were trying to impeach him, accusing him of permanent moral incapacity, presumably because the government hasn't been doing much, which, I mean, if that's the thing you're going on, then shouldn't you guys be impeached too? Basically, they were gearing up, they were getting all the files ready to, like, impeach Castillo, and maybe at this point, people would have been more inclined to do so because Peru Libre, again, he turned on them, so maybe Peru Libre would be a little bit more inclined to impeach Castillo. But the day before they were set to send in their motion to impeach him, Castillo came on TV and made a stunning announcement stating that he planned to dissolve the Congress for trying to impeach him, have a provisional government that would be governed by decree law, which basically just means law that, like, basically it's very, like, loose terminology, basically just saying that there wouldn't be a parliament. And then, right before he turned off the air, he would declare a national curfew and told anybody who possessed weapons to deliver them to the national police in 72 hours. While Castillo said that this would only be temporary, and that this would just be until they could call for new national elections, but not a single person bought that BS, because exactly 30 years, 7 months, and 2 days prior, President Alberto Fujimori did the exact same thing. Alberto Fujimori made a public statement saying that he wanted to dissolve Congress for a brief period of time in order to do some restructuring of the government. Very soon afterwards, he declared martial law, restructured the entirety of the Peruvian constitution to fit the need of neoliberal economists and the military junta that he planned to basically instill, and proceeded to commit a massive genocide against indigenous and impoverished Peruvians. Call it a hunch, but I think if a country has that in their history books, the first thing that you shouldn't be doing is trying to dissolve Congress for a brief period of time. Surprisingly, nobody had Castillo's back. Well, granted, he did have some people who had his back. 6 members of Congress were stupid and decided to vote to keep Castillo in office even after that. But basically, every single person in Peru agreed that that was just a step too far. And so much so that Castillo tried to flee to Mexico, but he was stopped before he could even set foot outside of the country. And of course, not long afterwards, his vice president, Dina Boluarte, was declared the new president after he was kicked out, thus making her the first female president of Peru. And one of the first things she did was that she would announce that she would form a national unity government to resolve the political crisis that Peru has had for a while now. And due to that, many people are, for some reason, taking Castillo's side. Like, objectively, like, here's the thing. A lot of stuff they're just saying, like, oh, the right-wing Congress had it out for Castillo. The right-wing Congress desperately didn't want Castillo in office. That is 100% true. But I guess, but does that magically make coup martial law okay now? Like, I'm perplexed. I honestly do not see how anybody can look at this situation and go, Castillo is the victim. Castillo was the problem. Like, he was the one who was just looking out for his people. Absolutely not. That is not how it happened. And then people are trying to paint like this new picture, like, oh, you see, you better be careful, Boric, because you'll see what happens. Better be careful, Petro. It's like, what are you talking about? The Castillo situation is not even remotely the Boric situation. Not even remotely Petro. Like, they're not the same. You do realize that these guys are different people. These are vastly different people, vastly different ideologies, vastly different methods to get into office, and of course, I would assume, vastly different, like, opinions on coups, because Castillo, obviously, he doesn't have that much of a bad opinion of coups. I literally don't understand how anybody can look at this situation and see Castillo as the victim. He's not. Like, Castillo has been crap since day one, and it's not my fault that you guys still refuse to admit it. Speaking of crappy politicians, let's move on to the next story. See, an interesting thing has happened. It turns out there's going to be a quite interesting thing that will happen with the next House Speaker election. Because despite the fact that he lost, Andy Biggs is going to be seeking the full speakership nomination. Like, he intends to have his name be put into contention for speaker when the House convenes, which is making a lot of people, Kevin McCarthy, very worried, because McCarthy, like the same thing happened with Pelosi in the last cycle. They had a very slim margin. In fact, they literally have the exact same margin at this point. Literally, they have the exact same margin. So literally all it takes is for some members of the House to not vote for you, and the other person will probably win. And this whole House Speaker debacle is getting genuinely confusing, because a lot of people are just throwing names out there. Like, one thing that has been talked about is the idea that possibly Kevin McCarthy might actually try to get some Democrats to vote for him in order to become speaker. Like, some people have thrown themselves in as potential speakership candidates. Like Liz Cheney, her name has been floated up as, like, she could be a good nonpartisan speaker. Justin Amash put his name up and just said, hey, you know what? Maybe I should be speakership of the House. Look, at this point, I honestly don't know what the heck is going to happen. All I know is it's going to be fun, and I am very interested to see what the heck happens. Speaking of things that I'm interested in seeing what happens next, something interesting happened with unions. And it's interesting because I just released a video talking about unions in the entertainment industry. But this one is particularly in the animation industry. Production workers at Nickelodeon Studios have voted to unionize with the Animation Guild, IATSE, Local A39. According to the Guild, 65% of the studio's 177 production managers, production coordinators, post-production assistants, art, whatever, all the people, have signed cards saying that they will be represented by the Guild. If you want an actual number, that seems to be around 115 of them. However, Nickelodeon, they haven't officially recognized the union, so what's going to happen is that they're actually going to try and, go to the National Labor Review Board as early as next week, or this week when the episode comes out, and actually start negotiating on forming the union. And this is something that's really good because, I've actually seen, this pop up a lot, New Deal for animation, because animation has historically been just not having a lot of good things about them. I should probably make a video about it at some point in the future. But, the New Deal for animation, a lot of animation people are making their voices heard in regards to how production people have been treating them for a while, and I'm very much 100% on board on it, obviously. And one interesting thing that will happen is that if this union, becomes a thing, then a particular person's dream will have finally been fulfilled. And this is just a little bit of an interesting story for those who don't know. Okay, so there is an artist by the name of Micah Wright. He's worked on a lot of games and comics and stuff. Some of the stuff that you might be familiar with is he worked on 2 of the Destroy All Human games, Path of Furon and Big Willie Unleashed. He worked on the Revenge of the Fallen game. He worked on League of Legends. He worked on the series Stormwatch Team Achilles. But one of the things that he is most prominent for is working with Nickelodeon. He was a script supervisor and writer for the Angry Beavers show. And since he became part of the show's stuff, he started thinking like, hey, I have an interesting idea for a TV show. Nickelodeon's like, oh, okay, yeah, that's interesting. You should probably get to it. And he worked on a pilot for a show called Constant Pain. And Constant Pain was supposed to be Nickelodeon's first action show with a style that was very reminiscent of like steampunk, anime, pulp fiction, and Soviet propaganda. I'm not kidding, that's what it says. It's a style that he uses a lot. And many people who have seen the pilot, like, they've looked at it and they're like, this is a really interesting show and this would have been really great. However, there was a problem. You see, MAGAt was very active in trying to get writers at Nickelodeon to unionize, and Nickelodeon knew this, and they didn't want their writers to be unionized, so they pulled the plug on a show. It was so quick that they didn't even give it a chance to be plugged in. And while writers weren't part of this union drive for like this newest one, it's a good start, and I think MAGAt would be very proud of it. So anyways, now let's move on to the last story, the arguably biggest story of the news cycle, one that literally just happened. Sinema announces that she has switched her party affiliation to be independent, now joining Bernie and Angus King as the Senate's sole independent senators. She tried to reassure the Democrats that, quote-unquote, like, nothing would change with this, basically saying that she intends to caucus with the Democrats, or at the very least intends to, like, negotiate everything with them. I think she would inevitably just caucus with them, but, like, the thing is, like, she is, like, tired of, like, the partisanship of Washington, and she believes that it is best to form an independent road for herself. But basically everybody saw the BS for what it is, but the problem is, people are still trying to figure out exactly, like, what does this mean? Like, because here's one of the weirdest things, because, like, oh, she's, like, working with, because, again, like, this is shooken up the thing, because, like, people were, like, celebrating, like, we finally got 51 senators, but then Kirchner just says, oh, yeah, about that, buddy. Now, there's, like, a ton of questions, and I think I can answer a lot of them. First one, why not just join the Republicans at this point? Well, you see, Sinema, she still wants to be, you know, important. Like, the thing is, like, throughout this entire tenure, like, her and Manchin were always, like, the go-getters. Like, they were the ones that they went to. Like, you would have to go to those two to get your agenda done. And she still wants to be that way because, like, that was one of the big things. Like, oh, if we win a certain amount of senators, we don't have to rely on Sinema and Manchin anymore. That was the whole campaign strategy for Democrats in this cycle. Vote for me, and Manchin and Sinema become obsolete. Granted, they only got like a slim amount, so now it's like, oh, you don't need one of them. So now Sinema is just trying to make it like, again, you have to rely on me and Manchin because Manchin's the one member of your party you can't trust, and I am the one who is an independent senator, so maybe I won't vote with you all the time. If she joins the Republicans, she's nothing. Like, she's only quirky in the sense that she's like a bisexual, like, Republican. Like, that's the only thing that makes her relevant if she joined the Republican Party. But of course, like there's like 10 million things that people are asking. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, and many people are even trying to go like, oh, but her donors. It's like, I don't think her donors specifically demanded that she join become an independent. They're not demanding that. They're really just demanding her to vote on certain bills. And this really doesn't change anything either way. But there is one thing that is kind of obvious with all of this. She's really doing this as a ploy. This is all just a game. She's trying to do what she did back in the last cycle. She's trying to scare Democrats into voting for her. Basically, here's what she thinks is going to happen. She thinks that if she's an independent senator, that she can copy Bernie's strategy. Because Bernie, here's what he does. Bernie, like, when he first ran for the Senate, he just ran and then just basically made the Democrats not want to run anybody against him out of fear of splitting the vote, and leading to a Republican to take over in that situation. So she is trying to do the same thing. Like, she knows that she can't win a Democratic primary in her state now, so her ploy is that she'll run as an independent so that she will try and make sure that the Democrats don't nominate anybody against her, kind of doing what Evan McMullin did. But here's one of the biggest differences between her in both of those scenarios. You see, McMullin was running in a deep red state to begin with, so there was really no threat in this situation. They had nothing but to gain and absolutely nothing to lose. And with Bernie, the difference is people like him. The thing about Sinema is, like, literally, I'm not making this as like a joke, literally every single constituency in her state hates her. Republicans, Democrats, Independents, LGBTQ, Latino, Black, White, women, men, all of them hate her. She is not popular enough to warrant that notion. And this is the thing, it still does not make sense. Because Arizona is a state that is steadily becoming more blue each year. Like, granted, yes, it's still purple, but it's bluer than it was before. And Sinema helped that endeavor. She showed a Democrat can win in Arizona. So the next cycle, more Democrats turn out to vote, and it leads to a wider margin of victory, which continues. And now, Democrats see that this state is becoming more viable for them. So, they're putting a lot more effort into getting people to register to vote. And those people that they're getting registered to vote are people who do not lean Sinema. They're people who would vote for literally any other Democrat to run against her. And by that I mean people who vote for Ruben Gallego, because the Democrats have basically made it abundantly clear that Ruben Gallego is going to be the candidate to run against Sinema. Democrats are not going to pass up an opportunity to run someone like Gallego, who is more than likely going to be infinitely more popular than Sinema, and could easily win against the Republican. Instead, just go, oh, we'll just back Sinema again. But there's one more thing that Sinema has forgotten about Democrats and, like, independents and third-party candidates. Democrats don't take kindly to those. Democrats will go around and say that her signatures are invalid. Democrats are going to go around and then say that it is all her fault that Roe v. Wade is taken away further and that gay rights will be taken away. They'll play those cards. They know how to play those cards. Everybody who's voted independent or left third party in the long time, they know that's what's going to happen. And that's what's going to happen with Sinema. But the real question is, does Sinema care at this point? No, she doesn't. She's a heartless whore. Call it misogynistic. Call it whatever. I don't care. Textbook definition of the word, she is. She is selling herself for money. This would be the exact same thing if she were a boy. This is one more thing that I have to show that shows how dire Sinema has gotten. Like, this is how bad the situation is with Sinema. It is now at the point where Joe Manchin has more credibility than Sinema. Because, here's the thing, at the very least, at the beginning of 2021, during, like, the debacle regarding the COVID plan, Joe Manchin, like, a bunch of Republicans went to Joe Manchin and told him, you're being demonized by the, like, Democratic Party for, like, being against this COVID plan. Why don't you just join us? And he told them point blank he would not do it. And he has stood by that and has stated, like, he repeatedly stated that he will not join the Republican Party. And as such, he's very much possibly going to lose the Senate race in, like, 2024 when it's his time to run. Because the GOP has basically said, like, join us or you're basically guaranteed the loss. Now, granted, he could change his mind, but at this point, Manchin has more guts and more principles than Sinema does. And the thing is, I knew that day one. Nobody believed me, but I've been repeatedly vindicated. With that out of the way, I guess it's time to talk about the main topic of this video. This one will be slightly more rambly and slightly less important, and I guarantee you the news stories probably will be longer than this one, but I guess it's something that I had to talk about at some point. We're going to talk a little bit about the Independent Political Report. Now, for those who don't know, what is the Independent Political Report, even though I've been shouting it out at the end of my videos for a while now, the Independent Political Report is a third-party focused news website that was started on May 20th, 2008, after a bunch of people left another prominent third-party news website, Third Party Watch, because they were critical of the Libertarian Party nominee Bob Barr. I don't know if it was necessarily because of this exodus, but pretty soon afterwards, Third Party Watch would basically fall apart, and the Independent Political Report basically became the website that you would go to for your third-party news. Like, that was the place where you could get your, like, interviews with freaking, trying to think of this random obscure, like, Daryl Perry. Like, you would get your interviews of Daryl Perry there. Darcy Richardson would, like, write articles here and there. They'd post links to, like, third-party debates and stuff and interviews. Every election cycle, they'd, like, hire one or two people within the campaign of a party, then, you know, see what they have to say. There was even a brief moment in time from 2009 to 2011 where they had a blog talk radio show. I'd play a clip of it here, but I guess all of the episodes became on demand, or they're just dead links now, because I've been trying to play one and it just doesn't work. It might work if you like did went to the Wayback Machine and tried to do it. I'm not gonna do that just for some like old clip of Darcy Richardson trying to talk to Daryl Perry over the phone. That's one thing I did remember. Like, I did remember, like, there's one episode where it's like Daryl Perry, the guy who's like a extremely fringe like group like the Boston Tea Party, and then he joined the New Hampshire Liberty Party, and then he became the chairman of the New Hampshire Libertarian Party. And remember, that's the Libertarian Party that goes around saying like the Holocaust didn't happen. So but it was basically like an internet novelty for a while. You know, I don't necessarily know like the ins and outs of like all of like the history of Independent Political Report, because there's actually not that much about it aside from like the site itself. You could see like a bunch of the old like forum posts that they weren't really forum posts, it'd be like open threads. It was basically a very, very archaic like news blog or whatever. It was a pretty interesting novelty, all things considered. But that begs the question, okay, but like why are you talking about it? Well, again, if you haven't been paying attention, even though I've been saying it for like a while, I have actually been working on the Independent Political Report for a while. Literally, ever since the foundation of this channel. I started writing on it basically right after I got kicked off of Real Progressives. I mean, almost literally after I got kicked off of Real Progressives, because it was like, I found the site and I was just like interested. I don't remember how I found it. That's a very weird thing. Like, I don't remember how I found it. I'm pretty sure I found it just because of like just me looking up like things about third parties, and the Independent Political Report came up because it was like the only source where you could find out a little bit about these third parties. Like, this was the only place they could really go to for like, this was the only place they were basically guaranteed to go to if they needed media coverage. And me just being kicked out of this big lefty collective and then wanting to be part of another collective, I said I want to write articles on the website, even though I really didn't have any interest in writing articles at all. But that was the thing. I thought that was basically what you did, because it was like a lot of the other big name like progressive figures, they write articles sometimes. So I'm like, okay, so that means I have to write articles too. Even though, again, I really didn't have any reason to write articles. I could just make videos of them. But I was thinking, like, maybe I could use this site to sort of, like, get people to come to my channel, because, like, my channel's interests and the channel and the interests of the Independent Political Report, you know, they sort of meshed around. So maybe there could be, like, a sin-centric unity. Maybe I could try to revive the website, and they could be a little bit more focused on, like, new media ventures, like YouTube. Like, I could be, like, their, like, YouTube man. There wasn't really any interest in it, and I think it was pretty obvious that I was just like some kid that was very interested in like the minor party sphere. So just like, so they basically just threw a bone at me, just like, hey, you know, here you can publish articles now. Though granted, we'll get to a little bit of that in a bit. I like joined basically like around the time that they were celebrating their 10-year anniversary, and you know, I did write some articles for them. And unlike real progressives, they didn't like edit my articles to completely change the message of the article and then make that tagline like that they edited into like the tagline of the article. Like they basically gave me free reign. Like I didn't have like they didn't say like you have to publish X amount of like content a week or X amount of content a month. Basically, it was like this very loose contract, like post articles whenever you want, as long as it stays in the realm of like the third party sphere or the independent sphere, you know, fine. I basically published articles, you know, again, from time to time, talking about, you know, some of the left party things. Like I talked a little bit about like, you know, like the first article I published was literally just me listing some of the potential or current Green Party presidential candidates for the upcoming, at the time, 2020 election. That one sort of became a focus of the independent political support sphere, but I did publish like other articles. Now, I can't tell you all of the ones that I wrote because of something that I'll get into a little bit at the end. But I do remember some of the stuff that I published. Like I published a thing talking about like how New York wanted to abolish the ranked choice voting, like the fusion ballot lines. I talked about that. I made an article talking about how George Galloway was running in a constituency, and then there's some people like, hey, is this something that you could publish on IPR? And I was like, I was told that as long as it was like minor or third party based, it was fine. And it was, considering George Galloway was running as an independent at the time. And again, things got into a little bit of a head when I started writing articles about, like, more in depth about the Green Party debacle. You see, you know, if you remember, the 2020 Green Party presidential primary was a little bit of a heated one, let's be real. And I couldn't necessarily talk about it on my channel because this isn't necessarily a thing that I felt was, it wasn't that it wasn't worthy, it's that it wasn't a thing that I wanted to talk about like consistently on the channel. But the Independent Political Report gave me an outlet where I could talk about it. I talked about the lead up and the fact that in a third party, you would, like, I wrote an article talking about how like third parties are either like based directly on a figurehead or they're going to be part of like the very few members that people actually know. And then I published Ian Schlockman's article with his permission, talking about how the Green Party was very clearly snubbing him in favor of whatever. I think I linked something about I think I linked a Green Party debate and talked about it like briefly, because it's what you could also do. Like you could link something and then like give like a short blurb explaining what it was for the people who do IPR. I used that opportunity to plug two of my videos where I talked about like where I did interviews with Ian Schlockman and Senator Curry. I was also very active in like the comment section of a lot of the ones, getting into frequent arguments with a guy by the name of Don J. Grunman, this super far right guy who was working with the Constitution Party and then American Independent Party, whatever. Like he worked with both of them at one point, and it was pretty good. But there was a bit of an issue. You see, I joined at literally the worst time because the site was on a massive decline. The guy who owned it, Pauly, legitimately did not care about the site. I think he was basically borderline suicidal because it was just like, the dude was just depressed all of the time, and he talked about it like a lot. When I was privy to like behind the scenes stuff, things were just like, it was just not looking good. He was like, I want to sell it, I want to close the site, whatever. And I just joined, so I was just like, okay, that's interesting. And it makes sense, like, business-wise, it just made sense. The site was too much of a burden. Basically, everybody in the like independent sphere has moved on to either just talking about it on Twitter, maybe they'll have a Substack if they want to talk about it, or they're, like, watching YouTube videos. Really, not a lot of people are going to the Independent Political Report. It was dated, it was basically irrelevant at this point, and it didn't really have much appeal. Because, like, here's the thing. I was the only leftist on like the site's board. The entire site's board were like libertarians and centrists, and sometimes you got an occasional like far right guy. You got some comments that were a bit more like divided equally, but even the ones who were supposedly like right, like left wingers, they had right wing tendencies. Like there was this one guy, Socratic Gadfly, who was like very, very, very much like, he's supposed to be like the super far left guy, but he like hates trans people. He hates trans people. He literally even wrote an article about me because I critiqued somebody being transphobic. I use this opportunity to raise attention to like the Chad Wilson group and like their far right tendencies. And things were going great. But then eventually things became apparent, like, and I think the site got like a little bit of a boost because, presidential election. But then, like, basically every single political thing, like, ever after the presidential election ended, so too did interest in politics. And IPR went down more, and things were a bit of a burden. I don't know if it was like before the 2020 like election or like after, but like the former owner of the Third Party Watch, Austin Cassidy, then bought the website. And the thing about Cassidy was that he was like a very stark contrast to Pauly, because Pauly, like I said, very depressing guy. Austin Cassidy seemed to have this like very like I didn't really interact with him much, I don't think, but it was like he definitely ran the site differently. Like, this was clearly like a passion project of his. Like, he definitely wanted to make it work, and that's why he bought the site to begin with. But he's like, it was definitely like a thing. Like I said, if it doesn't work, oh well, I'm still gonna try. But like I said, as soon as 2020 ended, interest in like especially third parties kind of faded in the aftermath of the 2020 election, because it's the cycle. The cycle is always this: interest in third parties rise massively in one cycle, and then that cycle causes third parties to get a bad rap because of some perceived like spoiler effect, and then third party interest tanks. And again, there was really not much else to talk about. And that's one of the big things about third parties. Like, people, like, this is one thing I learned about third parties. Like, they really expect you to cover third parties even when there's like nothing to cover. Like, Greens, they like run candidates sometimes, but it's like, okay, but like what do you have out there, like, explain the message of your candidates or whatever? And, my channel, I was focusing mainly on my channel, and the IPR was more of like a side thing. I still didn't want to like half-ass IPR. I wanted to like genuinely do something with it. And then I did actually come up with one idea. It was an interesting idea. Like, it came to me just like, I think the day of the first article I did this for, but it was basically, I would choose a political figure that had a prominent history, but not too prominent, or like someone that would be prominent enough that I wouldn't necessarily consider worthy enough to make a full-fledged video about. Though again, I could have easily just went back on them at one point. But basically, like a political person that I think their story was basically not big enough for a video, I would write a brief article about on their birthday, and it would be published. It would basically be something along those lines. The first one I published was called Marion Butler, a North Carolina Populist, and I wrote a lot more. Barry Commoner, the Progressive Ecologist. Hiram Johnson, an Irreconcilable Progressive. Now, that Hiram Johnson one, you might say, wait, but didn't you make a video on Hiram Johnson? Well, yes, I actually wrote that article specifically to promote the video. Henry Wallace, the original Dem Exeter. Floyd Olson, radical turned greatest governor. Norman Thomas, the socialist minister. Vito Marcantonio, American laborite. Peter Camejo, watermelon through and through. Horace Greeley, the man of multiple isms. Victor Berger, sewer socialist. Leo Isaacson, Bronx laborite. Benjamin Spock, socialist pediatrician. And I did that for a while, and it was very interesting. But this is one of the things, like, I only write those things when the inspiration hits, and it usually only hits the day of, so I usually just crack out the Wikipedia article, or whatever other sources I have on them, look at them, figure out, like, the biggest pieces of things to do, brief summary of their life, picture, and then post. And usually when I would figure out, like, a certain politician would have a birthday, it was like, literally, it's like, oh, the birthday's about to pass, so it's like, there's no point in me writing an article anymore. And it was around the time that I published, like, the last one of these articles, Benjamin Spock, Socialist Pediatrician, on May 2nd, 2022, then things got a little bit interesting. Like, I was still posting, like, other articles around the time period, like, a little bit afterwards, I would talk about, like, the Matthew Ho situation with North Carolina, like in North Carolina, their Green Party. I talked a little bit about the stupid endeavor of People's Party trying to draft Jimmy Dore for president. But one thing that sort of like was happening in the time period kind of like made me question things. Like Austin Cassidy, like one of the things that sort of changed was like a little bit, like some of the rules that I had been taught with the website were sort of lessened. And one of the ways I noticed was that there was this one site member named Thomas L. Knapp, who is this prominent, like, libertarian guy, like, basically like a Daryl W. Perry, but not Daryl W. Perry, who published basically opinion pieces. Like, I mean, and that was, like, irked me because it's like, why is he allowed to, like, make opinion pieces? Because one of the rules that I had when I went to the site was, like, no opinion pieces. I could publish someone else's opinion pieces. Someone else could publish my opinion pieces. But you couldn't publish your own opinion pieces because that's not what the site was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be about the news. You're reporting on, like, the independent political news. And it just so happens that his, political opinions and theories were noticeably right-wing, libertarian. And I couldn't help but wonder, it's like, is that the only reason that he's allowed to get away with it? Like, is the fact that he leans right the reason why he can get away with his, like, putting basically opinion pieces out there? And if I were to start publishing opinion pieces, wouldn't I be, I'm pretty sure if I did that, I would have been, like, flacked on. I mean, I was already getting flacked on by the content I was posting, because I would post this stuff, and then I'd get, like, some random, like, Ron Paul, like, fan account basically be like, hey, can you, like, stop posting this stuff and start posting, like, actual news? And it's like, there's no news to talk about. That's my point. I'm talking about all this stuff because, and it's like, again, and this is another thing, like, this is stuff that other people were posting too. Like, Darcy Richardson, he'd post, like, every week, like sort of like a time cap, like, what do you call time capsule, and basically some random, like, historical fact that you can easily look up on Wikipedia or something, and no flack there. There was no problem there. But things wouldn't shift again until June 18th, 2022, when Austin Cassidy decided to sell the site to George Phillies. Now, which is weird, because, like Austin Cassidy, he posted about this, like, 2 months before it was bought. He said, like, somebody offered to buy the website from him, and he said no, but then he said, make me an offer. And I guess the offer was big enough that he sold the site. It made no sense to me because it was like Austin really seemed to care about the site. It didn't make sense to me why he would then choose to sell it to George. But then I remember George obviously made an offer that he liked. And George decided to do something controversial with this newfound power. You see, now that IPR was his, he decided to do something that was basically unheard of. He actually tried to turn independent political report into a viable business. And that's when things started becoming like things started changing. Like, one of the first things he did was, like, he changed the site to make it into a different sort of format. It made it a different format. He changed the handle, he changed a lot of stuff. Like, he changed the handle of the site, like, make it an official handle, like, official website. And by doing so, he would change, like, sort of like how the backbone of the site was. And also, one unintended consequence was, or maybe an intended consequence, because that was an issue with the site, was that since a lot of the old threads were still open, more people would comment on those threads, which would make the site go slower. And almost universally, he just turned off the comments on a lot of really older articles. And now, certain political opinions were not really tolerated on the site. Granted, most of the ones that were not tolerated were, like, very much, getting rid of them is not really, like, a big deal. People who were, like, rapidly anti-Semitic and, like, extremely, like, fascist. He started getting, like, partners to work on the site. He opened the third-party watch again. And this is where things just started becoming vastly different. You see, at this point, I had already started, like, losing interest in IPR. Like I said, I was never really intending to like write articles to begin with, but you know, I had gotten better, I had improved a bit, but I was like, again, this isn't really my interest. It's like, why work on IPR when I could work on my videos or do literally anything else if I'm not working my videos? And as I mentioned before, you know, I started posting significantly less to the point where, like I said, the Spock video, the Spock article was like the last one I had written, and that was in May. And basically, I could only bring myself to like write one article a month. I talked about the Matthew Ho situation, but it was like one article in August and one article in June. And the last article I wrote was me talking about like this one small, like, because it was a funny thing that I thought was interesting. It was like the Communist Party, like Hinkle and Haas and like their stands, like made a bunch of like fake Communist Party accounts. And I thought that was interesting and kind of newsworthy to point out. But like, as I've stated again and again and again, I've just gradually lost interest in the Independent Political Report, and seeing like the freaking like sponsor page or like whatever, it's like the site's gotten like way too corporate, and it's like a lot of the things that supposedly like they're supposedly to make the site better, I think have just kind of made it worse. Like, I mean, I don't really see a lot of people comment. Like, I mean, there's some people that I just used to see come all the time that are just not there anymore. They were either banned or they just didn't really, like, they just don't comment anymore because they lost interest as well. But like, even the back thing, like in the background, things are weird. Like the new way that the articles are like structured in the like back side of the site, it's so weird. Like the words are all scrunched up at the end of the thing, so like you can't even read what it's saying. And for some reason, you can't find your articles anymore. Like, I click the author page, you can't find my backlog of articles anymore. And then when I go in the background and then go to the thing where it's like my articles, I click it, and it's still not there. And then when I try to look for like, okay, who wrote all these articles? Okay, I can't find their author page either. Like, it's just weird, and it's not working right. Like, I mean, and there's not even a way I can really end the episode, because it's like, there's not much else I could say. Like, will I write articles for the Independent Political Report in the future? Maybe, maybe not. I don't really have an interest of like formally quitting, because it's like, there's not even like a job there to begin with. I'm not like one of like the 2 or 3 people that are on the payroll, because I don't like work on like the back of the site. I just write the articles, and again, I don't even do them frequently. This is something I've like thought about for a bit, like now, because like, if you notice that there's at least one episode previously where I tried to remove the Independent Political Report part from like my back end speech, but it was like, I just need to get used to not saying anymore. Like I don't know. Like, I don't know. I probably will keep it like at least linked in the. No, I can't even do that because it doesn't take me to an author page anymore. So there's no point in having it linked in the bottom. There is one interesting thing that I could do, but I probably won't even do that, because it's like, it's not really even worth it. It's not worth it. It's like, I don't have a hate for like most of the people on the site. There's really nothing. Like, I feel nothing of this site. It could just be because I'm dead inside, but like, again, I don't feel anything. So yeah, again, that's pretty much all I have to say. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video mine comes out. And if you need some more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon.